Have you ever wondered why a man can look so composed on the outside after she leaves, yet inside he is bleeding in ways even he cannot name? That is where I want to begin with you tonight. Because when a woman walks away, it does not only feel like the loss of her presence, it feels like the collapse of a world you built unconsciously, brick by brick around her. And the silence she leaves behind becomes louder than her voice ever was. And before we go further, if what I'm saying already stirs something inside you, if you've ever felt that quiet ache after she walked away, pause for a moment. Subscribe here so you won't walk this road alone, and leave me a comment if these words echo your own experience. Because healing begins not just in silence, but in knowing there are others walking beside you. You see, in my chair as a therapist, I have listened to countless men whisper the same confession. I thought I would move on. I thought time would heal, but it hasn't. They say this after months, sometimes years. Neuroscience tells us why dopamine, the brain's messenger of reward, has been conditioned to fire in her presence. Every touch, every laugh, every shared ritual etched grooves in the mind, grooves that do not fade easily. The withdrawal is not from her, it is from the chemical symphony that your body once associated with safety and belonging. But here's the deeper truth. It is not only the neurochemistry. Carl Jung once wrote that what we cannot make conscious will return to us as fate. When she left, she did not just break your heart. She exposed a shadow within you, the part of you that had always feared abandonment, the part that longed for validation but never received it as a child, the part that clings because it does not yet know how to stand whole. That shadow hurts more than her departure. Let me tell you something that may feel uncomfortable. She did not cause your deepest pain. She only revealed it. The ego insists, she betrayed me, she destroyed me. But the psyche whispers a quieter, more dangerous truth. I was already fragile. She only showed me where, and that is why many men cannot let go. Because to release her is to finally face themselves, naked and unarmored. This is where shadow work begins. You must sit with the wound instead of rushing to patch it with distractions, new faces, or anger. You must ask yourself, what part of me did she awaken that I had buried? Perhaps she stirred your longing for a nurturing mother you never truly had. Perhaps she mirrored the standards you secretly hold against yourself, the harsh inner critic that always whispers, you are not enough. Or perhaps she carried the anima, the inner feminine within you, and losing her feels like losing half your soul. When you begin to see this, the story changes. Her leaving ceases to be a theft and becomes a mirror. In the silence after her footsteps fade, you can hear what you were never willing to hear before. That love is not a cure for your unhealed places. It is a catalyst, and sometimes a cruel one. So here is the first step I offer you. Do not ask, how do I win her back? That is the language of ego. Ask instead, what in me is crying out through this grief? Do not numb it. Write it down. Sit in the discomfort. Let the tears come, not as weakness, but as data signals from your unconscious that something buried is asking for the recognition. This is where healing begins, not in forgetting her, but in remembering yourself. If this resonates, stay with me, because in the next breath, I will take you deeper, not into her absence, but into your own reclamation. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind declares war the moment she walks away? The voice inside insists, she destroyed me. She ruined everything. But pause for a moment. Is it truly her hand that pierced so deep? Or is it your ego crying out, refusing to let go of the image it once clung to? That's the subtle cruelty of our heartbreak. It is not just about her absence. It is about the collapse of the story your ego had woven, a story where you believed she was the proof of your worth. Jung would say the ego is a master of disguise. It convinces you that your pain comes from the outside, when in truth, it is your own projection, snapping back like a whip. She was never the source of your identity. She was the mirror in which you saw the parts of yourself you could not recognize alone. And when the mirror vanishes, the ego panics. It screams not because she left, but because it no longer has a reflection to lean on. Here is the turning point. Once you see that the sharpest blade of heartbreak is not her choice, but your own attachment, healing begins to reveal itself. Neuroscience echoes this truth. When you replay her words, your brain is not reliving her betrayal, it is reinforcing a neural loop of victimhood. But when you observe those thoughts without feeding them, the loop weakens each time you step back and whisper, "This is my ego speaking, not reality." You loosen the chains a little more. So here is a practice for you the next time her face appears in your mind. Don't fight it and don't worship it. Instead, ask yourself softly, what does this image demand of me? Then write it down. Not about her, but about you. Perhaps it asks for recognition for love. You never gave yourself for validation. You outsourced to her presence. By naming it, you reclaim it. This small act turns heartbreak into a classroom rather than a prison. You might resist at first. The ego thrives on drama, and letting go feels like death. But notice how liberation comes in fragments, like a window cracked open in a suffocating room. When you stop believing every thought, when you sit quietly and allow the ache to speak without judgment, something extraordinary happens. The pain stops being an enemy and starts becoming a guide. The truth is, your ego wanted her to be the medicine for wounds she could never heal. And now without her, you stand face to face with the only person who can, yourself. That confrontation is terrifying, yes, but it is also the first breath of freedom. Because the moment you realize the pain was never hers to carry, you begin to carry it with dignity. And if you can hold on to that thought, if you can let it simmer, instead of rushing to escape, then what comes next will surprise you. Because the shadow she left behind is not a curse, it is an invitation. Imagine this: she leaves, and suddenly the silence doesn't just sting, it feels alive, almost like a haunting. You catch yourself hearing her voice in empty rooms, seeing her face in strangers. But what if I told you this presence isn't really her? It is the shadow she awakened in you, lingering, demanding to be seen. Jung taught us that the shadow is not evil, it is simply the unacknowledged. It is the part of you you've buried, your insecurities, your hidden rage, your longing for nurture, your fear of being unwanted. When she loved you, she pulled those shadows into the light. And when she walked away, she left you alone with them. That is why the pain feels unbearable. It is not only grief for her absence, but terror at confronting your own forgotten self. Here's the paradox: you cannot heal by running from the shadow. You only heal by walking into it. Neuroscience confirms this: suppressed emotions do not disappear. They carve deeper grooves in the brain, amplifying stress responses, locking you in loops of fear. But when you allow the shadow to speak, the brain shifts from survival mode into integration. What once felt like a monster in the dark reveals itself as a wounded child who only wanted your attention. So tonight, instead of numbing with distractions, try this sit with a notebook. Write down every thought that scares you about her leaving, not about her, but about you. I am unlovable. I am not enough. I will always be abandoned. Don't censor. Don't dress it up. Then look at each line as if it were a younger version of yourself, crying for recognition. Ask gently, when did I first start believing this? This is not weakness. This is shadow work. And shadow work is healing. You may resist it. Feels unnatural to embrace the very words that sting. But healing is not about comfort. It is about integration. Each time you face a line of ink on that page and trace it back to its root, you rob it of its hidden power. You discover that what felt like her rejection was really the echo of an old wound. Perhaps from a father who withheld approval or a mother who seemed distant. She did not create the wound. She revealed it. And now it is yours to tend. The beauty of this work is that the shadow, once acknowledged, stops controlling you. The fear of being unwanted becomes the doorway to learning self-acceptance. The rage at being left becomes the fuel to establish healthy boundaries. The grief becomes tenderness, first for yourself, then for others. This is how men are reborn, not by conquering women, but by befriending their shadows. Stay with me, because the next step is even more profound. Once you begin to face the shadow, you uncover a deeper truth. She was never the keeper of your wholeness. She only reflected the feminine you had forgotten to honor within. And reclaiming that inner feminine may be the most liberating step of all. Think of her as a mirror. For a time you stood before it and saw beauty, tenderness, and worthiness reflected back at you. When she left, the mirror shattered and you mistook the shards for wounds. But here is the quiet truth. None of those qualities belonged to her. They were always yours. She only gave you a glimpse. The healing comes when you learn to hold that mirror for yourself without needing her face to confirm what you already are. I remember a man who once sat across from me in therapy. He told me, "She was the only person who ever made me feel calm. Now that she's gone, I can't sleep." He believed she had stolen his peace. But as we worked together, he realized it wasn't her calming presence he missed. It was his own ability to soothe himself, something he had long abandoned. Once he began practicing small rituals of self-care, deep breathing before bed, gentle music, even speaking kindly to himself, his body began to remember that peace was never hers to give or take. It was his. Jung called this projection the tendency to assign our unlived qualities onto others. You adored her patience because it awakened the patience you denied in yourself. You admired her warmth because it stirred your own capacity to nurture. But projection is dangerous. Once the other person departs, you feel as though those qualities have been stolen. In reality, they have only been waiting for you to reclaim them. This is why so many men spiral after a breakup. They think I'll never find another like her, but what they really mean is I don't know how to see myself without her reflection. That is where your work begins. Each time you feel that desperate tug to check her profile, to replay old conversations, to imagine her with someone else, stop. Ask yourself, what did she embody for me that I struggle to embody for myself? Write it down. Then commit to practicing it, not as an imitation of her, but as your own birthright. Another patient once confessed that he loved how fearless his partner was, how she could speak her mind without hesitation. After the breakup, he told me, "I feel like I lost my courage when I lost her," but courage was not something she handed him. It was something she awakened. So I asked him to practice one small act of bravery each day, a phone call he dreaded, a truth he had avoided. Over weeks, his voice grew steady again, not because she returned, but because he did. If any of this resonates with you, if you've ever seen yourself chasing a reflection that vanished, share your story in the comments. I promise you many men here will see themselves in your words. And if you want more of these deep dives into Jung's psychology of love, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. At first it will feel hollow, even forced. The ego will whisper, "This isn't the same." But healing is not about recreating the past. It is about recognizing the future you are capable of building. With each act of self-embodiment, you weaken the ego's lie that only she could complete you. Instead, you become the reflection you once sought in her eyes. And there is a hidden grace here. When you learn to hold the mirror yourself, you no longer chase women to validate you. You invite them not out of desperation, but out of overflow. This is the subtle shift from need to freedom, from obsession to choice. But don't rush. This is only one stage of the path. There is still a deeper truth waiting, the integration of the inner feminine, the anima, the forgotten half of your soul. She didn't take it with her. She only reminded you it was missing. And reclaiming that inner presence may change not only how you love, but who you are. There comes a moment in every man's grief when he realizes that what he misses most about her is not simply her touch or her laughter, it is the way she awakened a softer, hidden part of him. Jung called this the anima, the inner feminine, the half of your psyche that holds tenderness, intuition, receptivity, and compassion. When she leaves, men often feel as if that half of their soul has been ripped away. But here is the truth. She never carried it with her. She only reminded you it was there all along. A man once told me, "Without her, I feel hollow, like I lost the part of me that knew how to love." He believed she had taken his capacity for intimacy with her. But as we worked together, he discovered that what she had stirred, the vulnerability, the openness, the longing to connect, were not hers to keep. They were his own anima, waiting to be honored. The tragedy was never her departure. It was that he had buried this inner presence for years and only allowed it to breathe through her. This is why heartbreak feels like suffocation. The anima retreats into the unconscious when unacknowledged, leaving you with a sense of emptiness. But emptiness is not death. It is a signal. It is your inner feminine calling you back. Instead of chasing her shadow outside of you, turn inward and ask, where in my life am I silencing my own softness? Where do I withhold care from myself? Write down the answers without judgment. Then begin practicing one small act each day that embodies what you once saw in her. Listen deeply. Create art without reason. Rest without guilt. Speak to yourself with the same tenderness you once craved from her. Here's a practice I give many men. Imagine the part of you that feels abandoned as a child sitting across from you. Close your eyes, place a hand on your chest, and whisper, "I am here for you now." This may feel strange at first, but with repetition, the nervous system begins to register safety, not from her presence, but from your own. This is reclaiming the feminine within. Another man, a hardened executive, once admitted he only felt alive when his partner stroked his hair as he fell asleep. After the breakup, he spiraled into insomnia. But through guided exercises, he discovered that what he longed for was not her hand. It was his own permission to feel comforted, to drop the armor he wore daily. As he learned to create rituals of softness for himself, he no longer begged for that energy from outside. He carried it. When you begin to embrace your anima, you stop needing women to complete you. Love becomes freedom, not dependency. And paradoxically, women are drawn more deeply to men who are not starved for their reflection, but who already live in harmony with their inner feminine. Do not mistake this for weakness. To embody tenderness while holding strength is to become whole. This is the path of individuation, the integration of opposites. It is the journey not just of healing heartbreak, but of becoming fully yourself. And yet there is one more step. Because reclaiming your inner feminine is powerful, but the ego has not given up. It will still try to trick you into clinging, into reliving the story. The final liberation comes when you learn to release not only her, but the narrative you've bound yourself to. Grief has a way of convincing you that life has ended, that the future has been stolen. But what if grief is not the end of your story? What if it is the doorway into the most important transformation of your life? The process Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming whole. The pain you feel is not punishment. It is initiation. I once worked with a man who swore he would never recover. He said, "Every morning I wake up and feel like she's still in the room, and when I realize she's not, I fall apart." For weeks, he tried to outrun the sorrow, numbing himself with work alcohol, meaningless dates. But nothing worked because grief is not something you can escape. It follows you until you turn and face it. The moment he stopped running and allowed himself to sit in the heaviness, to actually cry, to actually rage, to actually mourn something, shifted. The grief began to move like a storm finally allowed to rain. Neuroscience explains this well. Emotions that are suppressed activate stress circuits in the brain, keeping you locked in survival mode, but emotions that are expressed safely through writing, through tears, through conversation, activate circuits of regulation and release. So tonight, instead of drowning the grief in distraction, give yourself 30 minutes to feel it without resistance. Write, weep, breathe. Let the body tremble. Then tell yourself out loud, "This is not my end. This is my passage." Grief, when faced, becomes a guide. It teaches humility, showing you that you are not invincible, that love cannot be controlled. It teaches compassion, reminding you of the fragility of every human bond. And it teaches courage, inviting you to rise again, not because the past can be restored, but because the future still asks for you. Another man I knew lost not only his lover, but his sense of identity. For months, he wandered aimlessly, ashamed of his collapse. Yet in that collapse, he stumbled into painting something he had not touched since childhood. Through grief, he rediscovered his creativity, and with it, a part of himself he thought was long dead. The relationship ending had forced him into a death of the old self, but it also birthed a new one. This is individuation in practice, letting the false self fall away so the authentic self can breathe. And here is your task. The next time grief grips you, do not ask, "When will this end?" Ask, instead, "What part of me is being born through this pain?" Write the answer even if it feels uncertain. This reframes grief not as a thief, but as a teacher. Every pang becomes a lesson. Every tear becomes a baptism into deeper selfhood. Do not rush this. Grief has its own rhythm. But if you honor it step by step, it will transform you. And once you see grief as initiation rather than destruction, you begin to realize she was never the final chapter. She was only the catalyst. Still, there is one more trial waiting. Because even as you grow, the ego will whisper stories to drag you back. To break free fully, you must confront those illusions and release the narrative itself. The most dangerous part of heartbreak is not her absence. It is the story your ego keeps telling about it. The ego whispers, "If she loved me, I was enough. If she left, I am nothing." This story loops endlessly, like a film reel stuck in a projector, replaying the same scene until you can no longer tell where reality ends and illusion begins. Jung warned that the ego clings to narratives because they provide identity. Even a painful story feels safer than no story at all. That is why men often become addicted to their suffering. They confuse the wound for who they are. But here is the liberating truth. You are not the story your mind tells. You are the awareness in watching the story unfold. I once counseled a man who kept a box of letters from his ex. Every night he would read them, reciting the story of their love and their loss until tears blurred the words. He told me, "This is all I have left of her." But when I asked him to close his eyes and listen, what he heard was not her voice. It was his own mind retelling the narrative of abandonment. The moment he realized this, he wept, not from grief, but from relief. For the first time, he saw the difference between memory and identity. Here is your practice when you catch yourself rehearsing the same painful thought. "She was my only chance. I'll never feel that again." Stop. Write the thought down, then underneath it write, "This is a story my ego tells, not the truth of who I am." Do this daily until your mind begins to separate the drama from reality. This is how you disarm the narrative. Neuroscience supports this labeling. A thought reduces its emotional charge. By naming the story as a story, you shift activity from the limbic system, which fuels obsession, to the prefrontal cortex, which brings clarity. What once felt like an endless loop begins to lose its grip. Another patient once described how he couldn't stop imagining his ex with someone else. The jealousy consumed him, keeping him awake at night. I asked him, "Whose movie are you watching?" He realized he was watching a film. His ego had scripted a film that might never even exist. That awareness broke the spell. He began practicing what I call turning off the projector. Whenever the scene started playing, he would say, not my film, and returned to the present moment. Slowly, the projections lost their power. And this is the bridge when you learn to see the ego's stories as illusions. You create space. In that space, healing rushes in. You are no longer chained to the idea that her departure defines you. You are no longer at war with memories. You begin to live in the present, where possibility still breathes. But the journey is not over. Healing is not only about dismantling stories, it is about discovering the freedom that comes after the story ends. And that freedom holds a revelation so profound, it may change not only how you see love, but how you see yourself. There comes a point where you have listened to the ego's stories long enough, where you have faced the shadow, reclaimed your inner feminine, and allowed grief to teach you. At that point, something subtle but unmistakable begins to stir freedom. Not the freedom of indifference, not the cold numbness of pretending you no longer care, but the deeper freedom of knowing you are no longer defined by who stayed or who left. One man I worked with once described this moment beautifully. After months of torment of chasing ghosts of writing pages in his journal, he woke one morning and said, "I realized her leaving didn't break me. It woke me up. I thought I was searching for her, but really, I was searching for myself." That is emotional freedom, when the absence of another reveals the presence of your own soul. Here is the practice the next time her memory surfaces. Instead of resisting it or clinging to it, simply place a hand on your chest and whisper, "I release you, and I release the story of who I thought I was with you." Do this not once, but daily, until the words no longer feel like effort, but like truth. This is the act of unbinding, not erasing her, but letting her become part of your past without dictating your present. Neuroscience calls this reconsolidation. Each time you revisit a memory with a new perspective, the brain rewrites it. What was once a wound becomes a scar, and scars are not shameful. They are proof of healing. Jung called this individuation the integration of all that was fractured into a whole self. And in that wholeness, love transforms. You no longer chase women to validate your worth. You choose them freely from strength rather than desperation. The anima within you is no longer projected outward. It lives inside, guiding you with intuition, creativity, and tenderness. The ego no longer chains you to stories of abandonment. It bows before the greater self that has always been waiting for you. There is a profound calm that arises here, the kind of calm where silence is no longer haunting, but holy, where solitude no longer feels like emptiness, but like spaciousness, where you realize that healing was never about replacing her, but about remembering who you were before you forgot. And so I leave you with this truth. Heartbreak was never the end of you. It was the threshold. The woman who walked away did not steal your wholeness. She revealed the places where you had abandoned yourself. And now with courage you have returned. Remember, this freedom is not found in chasing what left, but in embracing what remains. And what remains is more than enough. Because, as Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The woman who knows her worth does not chase, she chooses. And so must you. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this touched you, let me know. In the comments, I'd love to hear your story. And if you want more journeys into Jung's psychology of love, subscribe and walk with me in the next chapter.